Christian boys.
Tonight, we're going to discuss a topic that's very important to Tom, something that we as Christians should really be on both the defensive and the offensive scope. Because tonight we're going to be talking about pornography and specifically how we as Christian men can fight against this sort of addiction in our culture and how that relates to Christian discipleship within the church. So Tom, where did this kind of desire in your heart come from in order to try to equip men to fight against this? And let's just start there.
Well, I guess it's been about 2 decades plus ago. I had a pretty severe addiction to it myself. And so when I told my wife about this occurring, that was the third time that I had told her this. And we were right on the brink of divorce. I was employed at a church at the time and doing what was my dream job. And we were about like a feather away from tipping the scales to divorce. And we had just had twin boys and I already had a daughter. So this was a catastrophic period of my life and certainly of our marriage. So got through it. We survived it by God's grace and the miracle that happened in the mending of our relationship. But I realized both during, I guess, and as well as afterwards, that what got me through it was a very intentional and structured discipleship process to allow my heart to grow where it was hard. And since that time, I've seen it opens your eyes to what you see around you. So be it pornography or poor discipleship, either way, it becomes very apparent after you go through something like that.
Yeah. Sorry to hear that happen, but glad to see that the Lord brought you guys through that. What would you say are some areas in discipleship as we see it in the church that potentially could lead to these sort of issues that we're seeing, where pornography seems like a good alternative to this sort of gnawing emptiness that our culture produces, instead of even those who are in the church going to Jesus?
So your question is, how does our current status of discipleship perpetuate the problem of pornography?
Correct.
Yeah. I would say, and probably the thing that I see the most in working with guys is a lot of our discipleship can be done that either focuses on completing tasks, completing a course, or being a member of this group or that group. And there's not real intentionality to see has a heart changed. That's a significant issue. I think another significant issue in the discipleship arena is, and I don't know if this is intentional or it's just sort of a byproduct of our culture, and that is that we see our faith to be something that serves us rather than us serving our faith. And so if you have a self-centered faith, that is, Jesus came to save me from my sins, so I won't go to hell. Well, that's true, but that's not where it ends. It's not the whole story. But if that is where it ends in how we worship and how we disciple, then self-centered problems can grow pretty easily.
Actually, on that topic, I've heard a lot of guys through different Bible studies and stuff. Me and Brent have done men's Bible studies, and just the ability to truly openly share with other men struggling with the same things. And one of the common things I've found with specifically pornography is that there typically seems to be this deep root of the issue. And it's not just lust. There's more going on. And there's, the things that I've seen at least is you typically see, okay, just do this, or just don't do that. And I feel like the guys that fall into that are truly addicted cannot just pull themselves out, cannot just will themselves out. There has to be something deeper. Have you seen that on your side? And what would you advise people if they're kind of stuck in that rut of, well, just pull yourself out?
Yeah. So the pulling yourself out bit, um, that's I haven't seen that work. Honestly, you know, God has created us. Why, I don't know, but I mean, it's just a simple fact of what we see in His Word, and as we go through our own Christian walk and growth. God has created us to be interrelational. On top of that, I mean, He chose man to be His image bearer. So while He could have taken care of everything Himself, He did not. And so it would be odd for us to think that God would not use man to help each other. So to say that you're going to do it on your own, in my mind, uh, there's an easy argument to say that that's really going against the design of creation. So don't do that. Uh, the other thing I would say, as far as the deep roots go, pornography is in many ways a symptom of other issues. Okay, so it it gives us feelings of euphoria, and if you want to get into it, we can. But the physiological changes to the brain and the chemical changes in the brain are very powerful. They're very powerful. And so now we have this thing where you don't have to go get a prescription and go on the street to get your heroin fix. You can do it now just by using your phone. And so if I have that drug at my disposal, I can take care of a lot of different things. So a lot of guys, especially if they're, used to doing a lot of gaming or being very active, and then they get into married life and they have kids, and now it seems like life is boring, they will take care of that boredom with pornography. Um, if guys for some reason feel less than in any way, shape, or form, they can feel greater than by using pornography. One client last week, who actually is 60 years old, um, is depressed. I mean, he's clinically depressed, and so he will watch pornography 3 to 4 hours, 3 or 4 times a week to deal with his depression, because he can do that. So there are root issues, and I don't want to downplay that. The problem is that when those root issues become the how would I put this? They become the reason for my existence, and so then I tend to give validation to my issue with pornography.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you know, for me personally, when I was growing up, I want to say this in the way that doesn't sound like I'm just trying to bash everyone I was around, but just the culture I was in, it was not like a bad thing. Like nobody, either the people that did think it was a bad thing didn't talk about it, or the people that did talk about it were just like, oh yeah, it's just what everybody does. And when you're talking about the chemistry of the brain changing, and I do think that's super fascinating, because now I'm almost seeing that same type of culture, seeing these studies and going, oh, maybe there is something here that we need to be wary of. Um, but like you say, it's more than just a sinful desire. There's a lot deeper issues going on. So I'm glad that you see that and can address that with people. So anyway, just the thought of this is not just a Christian issue. This is something that truly is pervasive throughout society. So
Follow-up question based on what you said earlier. You likened pornography addiction to something similar to a heroin addiction. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on addiction in general. Because yes, pornography is obviously a very widespread issue across the West, and especially in the church. But is it then acceptable to replace one addiction like pornography? Do I replace it with some sort of more socially acceptable addiction, something like caffeine or overeating or things like that? Or is that really just kind of sidestepping the real issue?
I don't know if it's ever good to replace one addiction with another addiction.
Yeah, it's kind of a softball.
However, it would you. the the damage that occurs in a person's brain from repeated pornography is astounding. It literally begins to degenerate part of the central parts of your nervous system in your brain. So, the for example, a chemical that is released at the point of orgasm is similar to that released when a mother is breastfeeding her child. So God has designed us in such a way that when we experience that with our wife, we are supposed to feel longing and bonding with her, right? So now let's remove our wife, and we're still experiencing that same physical response, but now I'm bonding with whatever was in front of me. And I'm doing it over and over and over again. What happens is that part of your brain begins to burn out, literally burn out. And so then what happens to a guy when that part of his brain burns out? Well, not only is he not bonding with his wife, but he's also becoming more short-tempered. He is more distant, more withdrawn. So the effects of this, you might want to compare it to another addiction, but if you're looking at that from a purely behavioral aspect, I don't know that there is a comparison. It has a physical detriment to what's going on in your head.
When you say distant, would you kind of say that's more like a disassociation in a way, or is that just more of like what do you define as distant in that regard?
Well, so I guess from a feeling standpoint, you understand. I'm assuming you understand what it means to have an affection for or a longing for in not only the relationship with your wife, but also with kids or with your friends or whatever. You have a longing for that. But now with pornography, you just take that away. Okay, it is now a chasm between you, or at least one that is growing between you and from a sexual standpoint, that and your wife. But it also, those chemicals are naturally around, and so it begins to affect the relationships around you that aren't necessarily sexual in nature.
I suppose I'm not really surprised to hear this is what you're saying, because like the science is backing up what the scripture has already communicated to us. We see this communicated over and over again by the Apostle Paul, especially in First Corinthians. If we're looking at chapter 5, and then later on in chapter 7 as well, where he's talking about how the community is suffering because of the sin of one person, and that because of that sin, it's affecting everyone. Like he said that there are some who are participating in the Lord's Supper, and they're drinking and eating judgment on themselves, and as a result, people in the community are dying or getting sick. And it's like this sin is spreading out to the community. And one of the most interesting quotes that I've heard from someone in recent years was a pastor, theologian, professor that one of my friends knew. Actually, his name's Shane Wood. We talk about him a lot, but he talked about how sin is never ever solitary. It's always communal. Whenever you sin, you're bringing your community into it with you, whether you intend to or not, whether you're being upfront and confessing it or not. And what would you say would be a step towards freedom for men who are sick of being in this sort of vicious cycle?
Yeah, yeah. So maybe a couple things. And when you were talking about that in the first part of what you're saying there, I'm finishing Between Two Trees right now, Shane
Hey,
Wood, and I was thinking about that. Yeah. So if you haven't read it, read it. It's good. Sin is a cosmic action. It is not just located in your own little world. So a step out of it. One of the There are many things I say to guys, but one of the things I tell them is, at this point, you mentioned earlier, Jacob, about how we try to do it on our own, kind of thing, and I call that beach ball work. Where I will feel really guilty after a viewing spree of porn, and so I will control this by pushing the beach ball underneath the water, right, and then it pops back up again. There's other beach ball work we do. We do beach ball work by joining the men's group and confessing every week the same problem. That's beach ball work because we think that'll make a difference. We do beach ball work by making ourselves feel guilty, and we believe that the guilt will hold it underneath longer, and that doesn't seem to work either. So what are the beach ball tactics? And we realize that that's really not heart change, that's sin control. Realizing that we're in sin control is a big step, but it's all those things we thought would work for so many times. That's what I thought in my own life. The various things I was doing, accountability groups and whatever. He's like, that's going to take care of it. That'll, no, it did not. So, well, now what? If I take away that, I take away my accountability group, and I take away the fact that I feel shame over this, and what motivation do I have to even deal with this? Or worse than that, what hope is there in dealing with this? And so that's where we get into this idea of, why am I doing it to begin with? One of the first questions I ask guys is, what do you like about porn? Okay, it's an important question to answer. What do you like about it? How does it make you feel? What are you away from when you're doing that? What is it? And guys like it for various reasons. Like I said a few minutes ago, it could be that I no longer feel bored. One guy told me, he says, I feel bigger. I feel more in control. And so for that moment, I have that. And when you find those things and you discuss them, you realize they're very self-centered. It's hard, and I don't ever just belittle a guy for having that, because that's kind of how we are, but they're very self-centered things. And so now it's time to bring out my good friend Dietrich Bonhoeffer and say, what does die to self mean? Right? What does that mean? How do we get it? It's a great phrase, all of us have been around the Christian world very long. It's like, yeah, I like that phrase. I use it. Okay, great. Tell me what it means. And so those things, those feelings that are driving me to it, first of all, I have to die to those. I'm feeling really stressed today. I'm going to hop on my computer, or I'm going to take my phone to the bathroom, whatever it is I'm going to do, because I know how they'll handle the stress. No, you die to self. You say, no, myself is pushing me in this way, and I will die to self. That's one thing. The other thing there's a lot more things, but the other big thing that I will often encourage guys to, and this goes back to the sin affecting the community around you, right? But if we're to be members of this kingdom community, then I have another purpose. So it isn't just avoiding a sin. I tell guys, look, you may have come here because you want to deal with pornography, but we're going to deal with a whole lot of other things. And so it's not just the porn, it's where are you going? Don't tell me we're just going to stop this and be done here. No, where are you going as a member of the kingdom of Christ? Because that has a responsibility. And I think what I hear usually after about 12 months usually is, I'm not thinking about it as much. I've got these other things I've got to do. And that's like where you go, I've just been witness to a miracle.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting that you say that the thought of it is going away. And a guy that we used to be in Bible studies with a lot, he would always say, take every thought captive for the gospel. And when he first said it, I was like, okay, sure, cool, that's a nice thing. Like what you're saying, the Christianese things that we seem to water down because we hear them or we don't understand what somebody's saying. We just say, okay, yeah, it's a cool thing. But the more I started thinking about it and actually saying, okay, how can I apply this to my life? And as I started, assessing, where are my thoughts going? What am I thinking about? Where's my headspace at? Am I truly letting it be captive for the gospel? I realized I wasn't in a lot of ways. And so, I guess in the same way, when you're talking about porn, it's to me, it seems like the same in the sense of, if you're giving your mind to the Lord, then it slowly will drift away from that avenue. Am I kind of on the right track there with you?
Yeah, as long I think it's good. How do I define take every thought captive? Because it's the
Mhm.
old pink elephant thing. Okay, I want to take the thought of pink elephants captive because I don't want to think about pink elephants. Because if I think about pink elephants will be in my mind, and then what I'll have? I'll have pink elephants, and on it goes, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, what does it mean then to take a captive? Well, taking a captive or taking charge of the thought may mean I'm going to start increasing a serious amount of time of putting other things in my mind. That
Mhm.
may be the way to take control of this situation. Um, and it may mean that I'm going to avoid getting in that situation where thoughts are more apt to come around that are that nature. So, you know, it just depends on what that means. So I guess if someone said that to me, I would say, great. Now I would ask them the question, what do you mean by that? And what is your plan like? And this is where having another person who's maybe, got a few more miles on the odometer than someone who is currently struggling with it. This is where having that kind of person is an important thing because if I ask you, what do you mean by taking every thought captive? And you tell me, well, every time I have that thought, I'm going to hit my thumb with a hammer. Well, now anytime I hurt myself, I'm going to think bad thoughts because I've just associated the two. So we'd have to work through that, right? It's not a bad thing, but just what are we going to do with it?
To appeal to the Apostle Paul once again, in Romans 12, he says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And if you want a further evidence that the Bible is in support of this, once again, the Apostle Paul, Colossians chapter 3, set your mind on things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. And as a result, you will not fall into the temptations of this world because you'll be so overwhelmed with the love of Christ that you won't desire the things of your flesh. The old man will die and pass away because you found a new and better love, something that is far more fulfilling and satisfying than any of your own self-fulfilling sort of selfish desires could ever conjure up. And that's what
Yeah.
kind of what I'm hearing you say, Tom, if I'm correct, is that when you are able to replace this desire, this self-motivated, I need to feel satisfied, I need to, forget about my stress or my worries, I need to take care of me, and you replace that with, no, Jesus is enough. Jesus is the one who's taking care of me. And if I set my mind on him, and if I live for his kingdom, and if I look at my ultimate purpose, my cosmic purpose, that's far more fulfilling than anything that I could ever conjure up for myself.
Yes, and again, I would walk with the person that everything you said, Britton, was is exactly right. It's that is some of my favorite verses there from Paul because this is your reasonable form of worship. Submitting your body as a living sacrifice, and I think the word worship there is similar to what he told Adam to do as far as working in the garden, right? This is what we're created to do, is to serve this kingdom. How do we do that? By renewing, putting your mind back or to where it was supposed to be at creation. So what do you have there? You have things I must learn and things I must do, right? But you guys know that there are people and there can be men in our church that do all the right things and say all the right things, and they have a huge problem with this. And so what's left? Well, what's left is what's happening with the heart. And so again, having someone to talk to, how do we assess the heart? That's kind of like the holy grail of discipleship, right? You say, well, how do you know if you're discipling someone? Well, we've got this program, that program, that program, so we're discipling. Maybe, maybe not. How do you know? And so my argument is that we have to think about what are the indicators of heart. I can't read someone's mind and know their heart the way Christ does, but I can begin to I can begin to get a gut feeling on it. What do I mean by that? So if I ask someone who says, hey, a young guy I just started seeing a couple months ago, all right, he was headed towards divorce with his wife. And he says, I'm telling you, I'm going to make this marriage work. I've been reading my Bible. I've been praying every day. I've been, name it. And he had been. I said, great. Why are you doing that? Well, I'm going to save my marriage. Well, that has nothing to do with Christ. Well, you think it does because God wants our marriage to be saved. I understand that. I get that. But your focus is not on Christ. Your real motive there is to get what you want. Saying the right thing, doing the right thing, missing heart completely. And so there are questions to ask about that. You can learn things. I'm glad guys are learning things. I'm glad they're doing things, getting involved. But I always, where's your heart in this? What's going on? Your motivation behind it. And we hear this from Paul as well. He may use words like desires, same thing. Okay. Flesh, he uses the word flesh. Again, that is what is the desire within me that's pushing me a certain way. And I give up the spirit of the flesh versus the spirit of God, which is a change in desire. So I feel comfortable and I get excited when I see a guy doing the right things and learning the right things, but especially when they're giving me these cues every now and then. I think your heart's changing because your desires are changing. You know, yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Am I
Totally.
coming through okay?
It totally makes sense. Yeah, because to echo off of what you're talking about, Jesus talks about this a lot. Is that he specifically is saying this to the Pharisees, but then he also communicates this a lot in the Sermon on the Mount, when he talks about clean the inside of the cup, and then as a result, the outside will be clean too. And the Sermon on the Mount is all about don't do the right things for the wrong reason. Do the inside work, and then the outside things are going to result as flow as a result. Things like not lusting after a woman, not cheating people out of what belongs to them, not wanting to divorce your spouse because you desire something else, not being angry at your brother, loving those who hate you and persecute you, not wanting to show off that you're fasting in order for people to give you praises. Like these are all things that are internal to you. And when you are setting your mind on things that are above, it means that you are not looking at, hey, what's in this for me? You're looking at it like, hey, this is what the Lord has commanded of me, and I love him and desire what he says. I desire to do as he commands. Jesus talks about in John when he says that if you abide in my word and do as I command, this is a paraphrase, so forgive me, but if you follow my teachings and follow my commands, then you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. And the amount of times where I've heard people say just the end, the truth will set you free, and they divorce it from following what Jesus says. Like, you can't divorce the two. You must have the two together. You must follow Christ if you desire to know the truth and for the truth to set you free. And so I think that you're spot on. It's a heart change first, which results in a change out here.
Yeah, I see that. I think I witnessed them happening all at once, which is much to many guys' chagrin because, they want to know what to do so that they're all better by next week. And that doesn't work. It's usually my experience has been for the we'll say the typical guy, and it varies, but for the typical guy, it's 3 months weekly. I meet with them, and then it'll be like another 3 to 6 months every other week, and then maybe another 6 months once a month to get them through. Because many times there's a significant relapse along the way, and so what does that mean? How do we talk through that? And it doesn't mean you go back to square one. So it all takes time. And again, that's one of those things. When I get to heaven, I want to ask God, okay, why was it 40 years in the wilderness? Why not 2? Why was it 3 days in the tomb? I mean, you did everything you're supposed to do. Why 3 days? Why? Everything takes time, and God has been this way since creation was 7 days, right? And so once again, I just don't know that we are in any position to try to bargain our way out of that. It's going to take time, and that's just about the end of the discussion.
On this channel, we talk a lot about this concept of, the Lord says that our hearts are deceitfully wicked, and who can know it? But at the exact same time, he says that he'll give us the desires of our hearts. So how do we have these two things together? And in my perspective, it's always been that when you start walking alongside the Lord, He's going to change the desires of your heart, and then He will give them to you. So you slowly start walking towards the Lord, and He will change those and then allow you to have them. And I just think that's such a cool thing. And as we're talking about walking alongside one another. This is where I kind of want to dive into your ministry and what you're doing. Um, can you just give us a understanding of where does iron on iron come from, and how did you start this, and what does your program look like in a nutshell as far as walking alongside these guys and seeing them have that change and have that desire for the Lord. So, yeah.
Yeah, so it first started, I think I was about a decade or so out from my own struggle with this and my own, I call it my spiritual crisis, because I think that's a good way to describe it. A friend of mine was having some issues, sexual in nature, pornography, etc. And we just started meeting, and I realized that there could be good from that. At least I was attempting to make it good from that. And then I had another guy, a few months after that, and a couple of years later, I picked up another guy, and so on and so forth. And so over a period of another 10 years, it became more and more frequent. So I was just meeting with guys that I just happened, word of mouth got around to me, and then I kind of linked up with a counseling group. They would have these guys that would come through their counseling, and they needed more long-term mentorship / discipleship. And that's not what the counseling group was there for, that they would claim was probably neither their expertise nor what they would have time to commit for. So they would send them my way. But then I would say 5 years ago, when I was seeing 7 guys in a week, it's like, okay, something's got to give, because I don't have enough bandwidth. And that's kind of where the more formalized ministry began, and how it's progressed over time to actually charging. I struggled a long time with whether or not I would charge for this. That was hard to get over, but I sought a lot of counsel on that before I went down that road. So as far as your question of what is it like, what is the program like? I meet one-on-one to try to get as extensive a background in history as I can with a guy, be that via Zoom or via in person. I'd like to do in person when I can, but it's not always possible. And then the next thing I try to find out is whether or not they're readers. Many people don't read, and it makes it harder when they don't, because I have limited resources. It's not that there are none there, but limited resources that I send them to when they're not going to read in between the time we see, because I don't. It's like, well, okay, we're done talking, so you don't have to think about this any at all until we talk again. No, there's homework, there's stuff to do. So if they do read, then I would say 95% of the time we go through a book called Costly Grace. This is a modernized version of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Cost of Discipleship. So it helps us. You mentioned earlier that the mind is wicked, and it is wicked in a way that we're not even aware of it being wicked. And I think that book is very good in helping us see that we're playing at church. So I go that way. If they're not readers, and it happens a lot that they're not, then I have to usually approach it from talking about the concepts that are in that book, or maybe there's a video they will watch on YouTube, and then we discuss that. And in the process, what you do is you begin to unearth the bad thinking that is there, and you're trying to put in new thinking, right? So we're renewing mind, okay? And then the other part of it is, okay, so what are you doing? What are you reading? Are you looking at the videos? Are you pursuing? You need to be doing something to pursue Christ. So what are you doing? So I say there's head and hand, right? Are we doing that? Are we doing head and hand? For some guys, part of their handwork is and this is what I did. You will make the bed every morning after you get up. That's now your job. It's like, well, is that the marriage saver? Is that the thing that's going to turn the marriage around? No, but it's going to keep you thinking about, oh, yes, I'm in process right now. Okay, this will not be the marriage saver, but I'm in process right now. And so that part of hand is going to go with what's going on with head. And then as we talk, again, I try to assess what's happening in their heart over time. Are they thinking about these things the right way? Are they doing it? If we come back in 5 weeks and he comes in and he says, I've made the dang bed every day for the last month plus and nothing's changed. Well, why were you making the bed? So she would notice that's the problem. You weren't seeking Christ to making the bed. You were seeking a solution to your self-centered problem.
Yep.
So that's how it goes. I mean, those are the things, and to say that there's a list, 1 through 12, a 12-step program, no, I don't. I just think, and I think I can make a pretty strong argument for this, no matter what part of Paul and much of you read of Christ himself, there are those three components to living for Christ: head, hand, and heart. There are those three there. And so whenever you see the word mind or think on these things, you were doing head stuff. We were created for good works, work out your salvation, do these things. That's all hand stuff. But then when he talks about spirit and how we war with the spirit and the spirit of the flesh versus the spirit of God, those are heart things. How is that happening? And usually the spirit of God moves in the more we put it to death by doing the other two. That's the process. And anyone who's so far, and I think this is just the evidence of God being faithful, anyone that sticks with that, whether they feel change happening or not, will wake up usually one day about 3 months into it and say, I don't know what's different, but something has changed.
It's funny you mentioned that.
Yeah.
I also was deeply addicted to pornography for over a decade. And then about 5 years ago, it suddenly ended. And I realized something similar along the same lines of what you just described, which was I I was far less concerned about what I wanted than I was at honoring Christ. And I found something that I loved a whole lot more than me. And as a result, it's not like it went away immediately. It's not like I didn't slip up. It's not like I, didn't to continue to feel guilt and things like that. It's just through the process of redirecting and refocusing desire instead of on myself and on my fulfillment, redirecting and refocusing it on Christ resulted in one day I woke up and I'm just like, I don't want this anymore. And thanks be to God, it never came back. Now I know that for a lot of guys, that's not their story, and they continue to struggle with this the rest of their life. Thank God that's not my story. But that
Yeah.
said, it's consistent in the understanding that like because your mind, your head, your heart, and your hand are all set on things that are not yourself and not furthering your agenda and not furthering your own desires, it results in a transformation. It's what you're talking about with the Spirit. Galatians 5 is one of my favorite passages, like whole chapters of scripture in the Bible, and it talks about what the fruit of the Spirit is and how if we plan to live by the Spirit, we must keep in step with the Spirit. Right. So if we want the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, so on down the list, it's not that we practice those things. It's that if that's the life that you want to pursue, then the result is to keep yourself in step with the person of the Holy Spirit. Being empowered by him looks like directing your mind and your actions on Christ. And then you'll be walking with the Spirit, which will result in love, joy, peace, patience, so on and so forth. And it's just this beautiful, what you said, God being faithful, is that he literally laid out this map for us. And all it takes is just walking it. It's not like there's any roadblocks. It's just you. You just got to wake up one day and say, you know what? I desire Christ more than I desire me. And any man that makes that step and takes that plunge will never regret it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so then if you see that a man attends church regularly, and believes that he desires Christ, but he doesn't, then we're set up for failure, right? Yeah, because what you said, Britton, is exactly true. But it's easy to be into the false camp of, yes, I'm doing this and I'm doing that and that, so I know I desire Christ. I want my kids to go to church, and so I must be desiring Christ. And it's like, not so much, And so sometimes guys simply just need to have that pointed out to them, and they sail, that they just, like, it's like someone puts a wind in their sail and they take off. And it's just a beautiful thing. And fantastic that you came upon that, uh, probably through the spirit or whatever, and you saw it when it happened.
Yeah. And I actually wanted to comment further and ask further like, so you call it your spiritual darkest moment, something along those lines. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact verbiage, but how exactly did you and your wife make it out of that deep, dark place?
um it was tough. um we both went to counseling. She, like I said, this was the third time that I came to her with this. Um, the first time was, I'm sorry, the second time, first time was before marriage. The second time was after the birth of our first child, my daughter. And then the third time was after the birth of our twin boys. And she, it was odd. She, she said, I can't believe you did this to us. And I heard that and I thought, what do you mean I did this to you or to us, meaning the family? It's like, this is my problem. This is my burden. And quite frankly, it was, woe is me. This is my burden, right? I'm dealing with this addiction. This isn't. And my theology was screwed up. It was bad. Um, so, so I made up my mind to attend counseling and just go through it. I literally, I felt hopeless. I mean, nothing had worked, and I never was. And I've heard other people say this too. I was never suicidal, but I really thought that if God were to take me in a car accident, that would be the best thing for my family. And so the hopelessness, and this is the thing that, I think Jacob asked earlier, what spurred me onto this. And this is one of the things that did is I hate it because I know guys feel hopeless. It's like, this is never going to end. How can, it's so ingrained in me. I mean, it's like telling me not to breathe. So they feel hopeless. So I made a commitment to continue with the counseling. But then one day, Mindy told me, she said, um, I I understand, I can forgive you. I just don't know that I can ever trust you again. And I thought, well, that's not good because it's really kind of hard to have a marriage if there's no trust. So as much as, I felt hopeless in getting over this issue, she felt hopeless in that there would never be any restoration of the marriage. But it happened. So it was a miracle. I mean, because it shouldn't have. Many women have left for lesser things. And so thank God that it was there, and now we have grandchildren. We have a marriage better than it was ever before. Sometimes we meet as a couple with other couples. Um, and it's it's left a scar. Sometimes we think about the scar and we touch it and go, oh yeah, I remember. But we also can testify to the faithfulness of God in very bad situations.
When you said that she told you, why did you do this to us? And something that I am working through in my marriage is that Not that I don't mentally understand it, that me and her are one, and that, under Christ we are together, and that we are experiencing all of these ups and downs together. My sin, her sin, it's all together. But I think sometimes it's just hard to take that initial looking up and going, oh yeah, it's not just me. I'm not just looking down at everything that I'm dealing with, but it's actually us together. Um, and it's a tough way to go, to have that moment. I would say be, your aha of like, oh, this is, where I am standing with my wife, and that moment of looking up. But still, I think just as Christian men, we've got to constantly be aware of that and be conscious of that, and not slip into the, oh, I know me and my wife are one. No, no, no. Like taking those active steps of looking up and saying, okay, I'm one with you, one in Christ. Your sin is my sin. Like we're working through this together. And yeah, it's, man, that was a tough statement. So,
What, tell me more about what you mean by your sin is my sin.
in my head, when I think about it, it's like, if I pop off with something, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. If I'm self-loathing or something, say I'm like having a really depressed day or whatever, it doesn't just affect me, and even though I'm the one that's dealing with an issue or whatever, it affects me, but it also affects my wife because she's directly tied to me. And so I don't think, and maybe depression is not the easiest one to describe, but I definitely think for me it can be very sinful because I'm just focused on myself and just focused on my feelings and wallowing, I guess, is the best way to put it. And so when I'm doing that, I'm not looking up and going, oh, I'm actually hurting my wife through this, or she's also dealing with this sin that I'm now projecting to her because she is tied to me. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
it does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the self-centeredness again, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know I deal with that. And that's something that I am actively working against in the sense of, again, making sure that we're on the same page with things, that giving her the freedom to call me out, I guess, in a way, when, hey, if I'm self-loathing, call me out on it. Like, let's work on this. Let's pray about it, and she's so good about saying, hey, let's just pray about this issue. And I try and do the same for her. But yeah, I think it's just in those moments, being able to go back to the Lord and say, okay, Lord, this is your marriage. We did this for you. When we got married, we took communion because it was like, that was so important to me to recognize that this marriage is the representation of our relationship with Christ and that he is the fulfillment in our relationship. So yeah, maybe I'm wandering off a little bit on this one, but that's what came through my head. So
No, I think that's exactly right. In that that fits right hand in glove with what I try to do with men when they're dealing with pornography, and that is you see this as beyond yourself and more than just I want a good marriage because I don't want to live in a household that's chaotic. You said this is your marriage, Lord. We did this for you. So even trying to be better about something for your wife has an ultimate goal of being a kingdom citizen. And I think that's where Christendom falls short. That getting our baptized or whatever you say your commitment is to becoming a Christian is not the end, it's the beginning of a commitment. And I don't know if we say that enough.
You mentioned earlier Dietrich Bonhoeffer's cost of discipleship, but that's a lot of what he argues as well. Is that what's taught as grace in our churches today is cheap. It's pathetic compared to the lifelong commitment and total resurrection, like life that one is meant to live under the power and authority of Jesus, and how if you're living for with a kingdom mindset, like you said, being a citizen of the kingdom of heaven, your life's going to look very different than just I mean, I said the sinner's prayer and I got dunked. The end. Now I'm going to heaven and I can continue life as normal. No, no, it looks quite different than that. It looks like what you talked about even earlier, dying to yourself, dying to your desires, and instead seeking to live like Christ and having Him model everything for you. Um,
Yeah.
one last question that I'll ask you, and then we're gonna have to let you go. But you talked earlier about how a lot of times, and what you got you into this in the first place was seeing and feeling yourself. Like sometimes men just get this feeling of hopelessness, like that there's no way out of this, and like this is just so ingrained in me. It's like I'm breathing. I can't find a way out. What are some examples that you can think of, maybe some tangible examples of areas where there actually is hope and ways that you've seen other men come out of this and experience that hope of renewal again?
So I think they begin, well, a couple of things. I usually try to share my testimony early on just because I just at least want them to have in front of them at least one example of someone who lived through it. Okay. So, that maybe is, I hope, is some hope. and and so that's one thing. And then usually I would say it's, going to be 4, 8 weeks, maybe more, where they begin to feel some change. They don't feel solid at all, but it's like, okay, yeah, this is different. Okay, so maybe this idea of truly pursuing Christ has some merit in it. I think that gives them hope. I think another thing that gives them hope is that when they do begin reading some things and realizing that some of their thinking is off, I think they go, well, okay, the thing that I thought was helping really isn't, because I haven't been thinking about it correctly. And so they're willing to give that time. So hope comes in, at least talking to someone who's made it through. Hope comes in when they do have some feelings that are different, and hope comes in realizing I've got, I'm doing a 180 here on how I'm approaching this. And so while everyone said that, XYZ over here would work and it didn't, at least this is something new to try, when you guys are too young. But, there was a craze in the 90s called Promise Keepers. And, a bunch of guys go to a stadium and they get all pumped up over the weekend and everything. And we all join accountability group, right? So, we'll never do porn again, and so yeah, I was in an accountability group. A lot of other people I knew that were in them or whatever. And so my accountability group consisted of going through a book together, which was fun. We went on hikes together. That was fun. And when it come to our struggle with purity, we would usually get together and say, well, yeah, a couple times this week. And well, yeah, once, or maybe this week, I held that beach ball down really well. Okay, well, good luck next week. And that was that. And so I thought I was doing the right thing. This is what the book said. This is what the conference said. And then it didn't work. And so, well, now what hope do I have? So sometimes when we don't teach doctrine correctly, when we do not discipleship correctly, we can take hope away from people. And that's a disaster. And it's very sad. My prayer is that hope is given because they begin to sense a change. And when they sense the change, they're going to be more bought into the process.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, kind of on an ending note, we want to give you a shout out on your Iron on Iron, but is there a website people can go to? How can they reach you? How can they get some references maybe from you, or look to
Yeah.
go through some counseling with you? Just kind of give them an understanding of where they can go. Yeah.
Yeah. So the website is irononiron.discipleship.com.
Yeah, for anyone interested in reaching out to Tom and getting some more direction and some coaching and some mentorship, the link for that is in the description. Tom, is there anything else you want to leave our audience with? Anything else that you want to praise Jesus with.
First of all, thank you for having me on. I mean, this has been a lot of fun, and it makes me really stop and think about things a little bit. So I appreciate that very much, and thank you guys for what you do on your channel. Talk about stuff that needs to be talked about, and not backing off. I appreciate that very much.